Welcome back to Subversive Preacher. My name is Cameron Miller, and this is a sermon or reflection or whatever you want to call it for the second Sunday of Pentecost, the season of Pentecost, or if you follow the Revised Common Lectionary, it's the fourth, proper four. But anyway, I don't know about you, but I sometimes keep a letter or even a scrap of a letter that I got from a friend or an acquaintance or something at some point, and then I sort of lose track of it, and it gets buried in with all this other stuff, and then one day I come across it unexpectedly. Well, what I want to share with you is that kind of treasure. It's a long ago Christmas letter from someone who is now long gone, but who I worked for as a consultant for a number of years in a job and in a relationship that was greatly influential on me. Carl was his name, and he was married a second time for both of them to a woman who had been like a surrogate mother to me through my high school years. Now, back in those days, Carl was not part of the picture yet. I knew Mary Helen long before I knew Carl. Her name was Mary Helen. Carl's letter shares the news that Mary Helen has developed Alzheimer's disease, which, along with the natural course of aging, required them to move into a continuing care facility. And it was before there were a bunch of choices along those lines. And they had moved to Maine for retirement, and they dearly loved Maine, but had to move to get to some place they could afford to be, or was near kids. I don't remember quite. But Carl described a situation in which he had a studio apartment situated about 100 yards from the skilled nursing center where Mary Helen stayed. Now, not being together and not sleeping together was a profound loss. So here is what Carl wrote as a description about their life at that time, a Christmas letter. Carl wrote, "Needless to say, this has called for a drastic simplification of life, and that's not all bad. It's good to discover again that the necessities of life require very little space. In ways that we never realized before, we are finding that when another person is your primary concern, life is not impoverished. It would be more accurate to say it is different, more institutional than we like, sometimes unsettling, but still funny and yes, joyous. This new life challenges me every day. What is Mary Helen trying to say? What does her world look like to her? Well-meaning friends sometimes say that life must be hard now. I wouldn't put it that way. Surprisingly, life here is full. There are days when there isn't even enough time for a nap. We are faced daily with what it means to be old people, and we're finding that Betty Davis was right when she said growing old ain't for sissies." Please hear Carl. It's good to discover again that the necessities of life require very little space. He didn't write, "It was so painful to sell and give away all the things we loved and cherished all these years," although without a doubt, that must have been painful. Again, please hear Carl. In ways we never realized before, we're finding that when another person is your primary concern, life is not impoverished. He didn't write, "I'm exhausted and beleaguered by the task of being the primary caregiver for my soulmate, who's no longer the person she once was." There's no perfume in that pig. It was surely grievous. And again, let us hear Carl. This new life challenges me every day. He didn't write, "Why has God abandoned me to this awful end of life?" Even though there must have been many times Carl felt that lament weighing on his heart. And finally, Carl one more time wrote, "Well-meaning friends sometimes say that life must be hard now. I wouldn't put it that way. Surprisingly, life here is full." He did not write, "I deserve better than this." Although I knew both Carl and Mary Helen, and they certainly did deserve better than that. Now please, do not hear more than I'm saying. This is not about the denial of pain or the denial of grief or struggle, loss, or deprivation. There is nothing romantic about Carl and Mary Helen's situation or end of life. Our lives have pain and loss and deprivation. It is hard duty for every single one of us at some time, somewhere along the way. But, and I hesitate to say this knowing of some of the very real struggle and grief going on here among members in the community here, and I'm sure where you are. But it is also what we make it, how we frame it. Your life and mine is a painting we paint. We choose the colors, we choose the shapes and the light that reflect the scene. We do not choose the canvas, and we have very little control over a great deal that takes place in our lives. But we do get to choose how we frame it. That may not seem like much, given what we have to endure, but it is actually hugely determinative. Well-meaning friends sometimes say that life must be hard now. I wouldn't put it that way. Surprisingly, life is full. I met a 91-year-old woman in El Salvador who lost 50 members of her family in one day in a massacre by government troops. At 91, still grieving, of course, she had not given up on life. She had not stopped living her life. She had not stopped hoping for better. She had not stopped working for better. She was poor and carried grief, the likes of which most of us will never know. And she, like Carl, lived a life that was full of meaning. She was called. Carl was called. We are called to frame our lives as a call to love more and to serve more and to give more is to live a life that is full and full of meaning, regardless of our circumstances. You don't have to see it that way, of course. We can frame our own lives and circumstances of our lives any way that we want. It's our call, and that's the point. We get to choose. It's our call. We think of calling or a calling as a voice or an entity from the outside calling into us to tell us to do something. Maybe sometimes it is like that. But mostly what a calling is how we frame the circumstances, how we paint the canvas, and what meaning we give it. That is our call. We get it backwards when we listen to these stories like Samuel and romanticize them with gobbledygook church language. We think it's about God's call to us, and we wonder why we don't hear God call in the same way Samuel did, or the way Jesus did, or even the way that the dragon heard Aslan. But it's not about God's call, it's about our call. It's about how we call it. Yeah. And that leads to a confrontation with how you and I see things, how we frame the universe and put and our little place in the universe. Is the cosmos a mechanical system of cause and effect that simply controls the well-oiled wheels of unchangeable scientific laws? Or is God present in the very fabric of life, mysterious in substance and action, curious in influence, a capricious lover of souls? Is the universe spinning like a top that's winding up or winding down, but in either case utterly indifferent to the little creatures like us who are speckles on it? Or is the motion and the movement of history, whether on our planet or among all of them, moving toward a vision perceived by the Creator, just like a painter moves from an empty canvas to its final resting place with her art. Is life a bitch and then we die? Or is it an amazing technicolored coat of opportunities to love and to serve and create change that benefits others? Are we just taking up space in the middle and getting as much stuff as we can get before we die? Or are we on a path toward an ever more generous life in which we literally give ourselves away more and more, as if an ascending rocket shedding its fuel? Are we hearing and responding to the voices of consumerism who call for our allegiance, or the voices of nationalism that demand our loyalty, or the voices of tribe or clan or kin that demand our identity? Or are we hearing and responding to the voices of God, whispering to us from the canvas of our lives, to cast our vision this way or that, and understand our context that way, or tickling us to consider it this way or that, instead of the frame that we were handed? It's our call, yours and mine. It's how we frame it, and nobody else. And with that sense of terrifying sobriety in a way, knowing that we do not control the circumstances of our lives except in the effort of what we make to shape them. We are all terribly vulnerable, and anything can happen and always does. But it's not only about what happens. It's also about how we interpret what happens and how we frame it within the canvas of our lives. We want more than that, of course. We want assurance, we want insurance, we want protection, we want control, we want security. We do not have them. We have instead our own choices and what we do with them and how we frame the whole thing within the larger canvas of our lives. So with that, I will end this with the truth about the call of Samuel. If all we know is that little bit that we just heard today, that it might seem like a sweet visit by God to a young boy, sort of Jiminy Cricket to Pinocchio. But the call of Samuel initiates the overthrow of a dynasty that's pretty much run the show for years. It was a dynasty that, like so many other dynasties, had thoroughly succumbed to the lure of materialism, greed, and rejection of God's best dream for us. So God gives a shout out one night to Samuel, and Samuel listens and then responds. But when he does, Samuel discovers that he is an instrument of subversion, a tool that releases a revolution against the current state of order. Samuel discovers that he is to replace a king who has no interest in being replaced. If we listen deeply enough to this story, we hear that God may whisper to us like a butterfly kissing a flower, but the consequences of responding to God may not be quite so peaceful. Carl and Mary Helen died in that continuing care facility. And I'm guessing that Carl did not see Mary Helen's death, nor his own, as tragedies and a painting in which their choices didn't matter and their pain and anguish was the last word. We have a calling, all right, you and I. And it is our call for how we will see our own lives and in the naked truth of our circumstances. Does how we see ourselves, our lives, our pain, our grief, our opportunities, our choices enable and empower us to keep loving, to keep serving, to keep giving? Or does it enervate us and victimize us and send us down a chute of no return? It is our call, our calling, our choice. Peace be with you. Thanks for being here.